He called me weak the first night I realized the dinners had gone quiet. Not to my face, no, not then, but through the silence that hung in our one bedroom like smoke after a match is blown out. Weakness has a way of echoing in empty rooms. It crawls into the space between fork and plate, between a question and the sigh that answers it, between two people who used to reach for each other without thinking. And then you notice your hand doesn't move anymore. You notice hers doesn't either. You notice the rain, always the rain. We used to laugh when the kettle clicked. T as apology, T as truce. She'd lean in and bump my shoulder. I'd say something small and honest like stay, and she'd pretend to be annoyed at how needy I sounded. The light over the sink flickered then too, but back then we called it charming. A quirky thing about cheap apartments and stories we could tell later. Now the flicker felt like a warning trying to get through, a Morse code that only grief understood. By the third week of the quiet, I started narrating my movements in my head. The way people do in documentaries when they don't know where to put their hands. Plate down, water on, stir, pause, don't ask why she's late, smile anyway. It wasn't that she was cruel, she was careful. Careful is a kind of cruelty. It says, I will not give you anything you can hold me to. It says, I'll be gentle while I leave. I came home to the smell of coffee at odd hours. Mug rings appeared like moons in places they never used to be. Window ledge, bathroom sink, the dresser where she kept letters from her mother. I found a stray receipt tucked under the radiator one night while hunting for heat like a dog, a stupid impulse, following warmth I could never keep. 2 cappuccinos, 2 almond croissants. The time stamp said 11:13 p.m. The cafe closes at 10. I held the paper and thought about how clocks can lie if you ask them. When she did come back, she took off her shoes like someone sneaking into a museum after hours. The bottom of the door scraped the rug. She didn't turn on the hall light, but she didn't tuck in her keys the way she used to either. The jingle sounded tired, like it wanted to be heard and forgiven. She looked at me, then at the wall behind me. The wall is stronger than I am. It never blinks. Long night, I said, casual, careful too. It's strange how we learn from the person leaving us. We pick up their habits to keep them close, and in the process we drag ourselves further away. She nodded, rubbed her thumb over her ring like it was the smooth back of a coin she didn't know how to spend. Deadlines, she said. She smiled without teeth. You know, I did know. I knew the texture of a lie told for someone's protection. I knew because I'd told those lies in my life, just not to her. Not until I started saying I was fine. I'm fine is a lie made to spare everyone the work of listening. I cleaned the kitchen that night like I was preparing a stage, wiped each surface until it didn't show my face anymore. Put the kettle on. She watched the steam with the reverence of someone watching a funeral procession. She sipped. We said nothing. The dark outside pressed its forehead to the window and fogged it with our breath. Distant traffic hummed like a body trying to sleep through. The phone was face down. That's how I knew. Not even the courtesy of pretending otherwise. Face down, at the edge of the counter, just within reach of where she'd lean if she needed to steady herself. It buzzed once like a warned animal. She didn't flinch. That's how I knew, too. She had flinched for years, startled by doorbells and dogs and my sudden affection. Now she didn't even look. Practice makes poise. The first time I saw his name, it didn't do the thing you expect. No lightning, no collapse. It was smaller. A little humiliation, like discovering your zipper has been down in a group photo that will last forever. He wrote with confidence, like punctuation was beneath him. You up, ugly and full of claim. Then, he won't do anything. And in that line was a room I hadn't noticed we were all standing in. He had measured me before I even knew to stand tall. I set the phone back down, face down again. It felt like placing a sleeping child in a crib and sneaking out of the room. I waited for the anger, the kind that breaks plates and makes neighbors understand you're a man of action. It didn't come. I felt something else. The quiet realization that sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is to stay still while the people they love turn into smoke. When she went to shower, I opened the balcony door. The rain steadied, not a storm, just a persistent curtain. I let it wet the wood floor, watched the water creep toward the rug and stop when it felt resistance. You learn something in moments like this. Water doesn't argue. It occupies, it finds the low places and lives there until the sun convinces it to leave. I touched the frame. Old paint flaked under my finger. The city smelled like wet concrete and exhaust and something sweet I couldn't place. Maybe almonds, maybe a memory I didn't want. By the time she came out, wrapped in a towel, hair slicked back like a confession, I had already failed to collapse. I had already chosen to wait. That's what weak men do, he would probably say. They wait, but waiting can be a kind of strength too. It's a long one. It asks you to keep your hands open and your jaw unclenched. It asks you not to apologize for someone else's cowardice. She looked at the open door, the wet floor, the tired rug. "It's cold," she whispered, as if cold was the problem, as if a heater could fix what was leaking out of this place. I closed it for her. I always close things for the people I love. It's one of my better and worse qualities. That night we lay like the edges of a page, touching, yes, but only at the margins. I counted the seconds between her breaths. I made a prayer out of timing, thinking if I could predict her exhale, I could predict her leaving. The rain softened and moved away. That's how I knew it would come back. In the morning, the sun was a rumor behind a sheet of cloud. The kettle clicked without ceremony. I made 2 cups and lined them up like witnesses. She didn't take hers. She touched the mug like a keepsake, then grabbed her coat. I watched a thread unravel from the sleeve as she pulled it on, a tiny loose thing that could have stitched us both if we were smaller. The door was gentle when it shut. That's how I knew it meant it. Her phone lit up on the table. She'd left it behind. It wasn't kindness. It was a mistake, but mistakes are doors too. His message was already there, bright as a flare in fog. "Tell him or I will." Underneath it, the earlier one, "He won't do anything." I stood very still like prey. Then I sat down. The chair felt like a hand. The apartment listened. The hum in the walls sounded like a long-held note. The first tear didn't feel like surrender. It felt like the body doing its job, relieving pressure, letting something out so something else could remain. I wiped it with the heel of my hand the way my father did when he thought no one was looking. In the quiet, a small mercy. The mug kept its heat longer than it used to. Maybe the porcelain remembered being held. Maybe I did too. I texted him from my number because I didn't want to use her as a bridge. "Meet me," I wrote. "Tonight, the cafe on Rowan, 8. Then I added, "I'm the weak one." Sent 3 dots. "Finally," he replied. "Let's fix this." Fix. The arrogance of men who believe solutions are weapons. When I looked up, the window had fogged enough to write on. I pressed my finger to the glass and drew a line that curved into nothing. Outside, a bus hissed at a stop, and the streetlight blinked like a tired eye. In the reflection, I saw a man I barely recognized. Tired, yes, but not broken. Not yet. Not ever, maybe. I rested my forehead on the cool glass and waited for the kettle to click again so I could pretend the sound meant something. The door opened behind me. I didn't turn. Her footsteps were soft, careful on the wet patch by the balcony. "I forgot my phone," she said. Her voice reached for brightness and found only pale light. Did you see?" She stopped. The question hung. The apartment held its breath. The quiet pressed in until it felt like a hand on my chest. "Tonight," I said, "I'm meeting him." A pause that could slice paper. The rain began again, thin as thread. She set the phone down beside the mug, fingers trembling like she'd held something too hot for too long. "Please don't," she whispered. That's when I turned slowly as if speed could smash us. "Why?" I asked. She blinked hard, the way you do when something is very close to your eye. "Because he's not who you think," she said, and then quiet. The kind of quiet that changes a room. Sleepless didn't mean frantic. Sleepless meant held open. Lamp on, off, on again. The city worked all night beneath the window, delivery vans reverse beeping, a distant siren that stayed small, never coming closer, like it knew this wasn't its story to enter. I lay with my forearm over my eyes and spoke to the ceiling softly, as though I could persuade it to lower by an inch, to let me touch the sky that used to feel possible in here. Grief is a tide, not a wave. Waves crash, look cinematic, get all the credit. Tides simply pull and pull and pull, and if you're not careful you'll look up and the shore you thought was permanent has edged 2 feet backward. I felt that pull in the objects we shared. The yellow bowl with the small chip we called Italy, the faded throw with a coffee stain shaped like an island we never reached, the chair by the window where she read poetry she was embarrassed to like. Everything suddenly wore a tag, ours. Now it all glowed with the possibility of becoming mine. That's the cruel arithmetic of betrayal. It turns plural into inventory. I found traces of him the way you find lint on a dark sweater. A cologne that didn't belong to our mornings. A new song added to a playlist we'd curated for drives in the rain, only this track had a drum line too arrogant to be ours. A receipt I should have thrown away but tucked into a book like a pressed leaf, something to study when I needed to believe I hadn't imagined it. When did the studying stop? When do you let the museum close? At noon I walked to Rowan, just to stand outside the cafe and see if it was a place that deserved what would happen in it. The awning sagged with rain, the letters on the glass hand-painted and a little imperfect. Inside, people laughed like their mouths weren't broken. The coffee machine hissed and exhaled. The bell on the door sounded like childhood. I hated it for making me remember things that didn't help. On the way back, an old man fed pigeons in the gray square. He held his palm out and waited. They came without fear. He whispered to them as if their hunger needed reassurance. I stood and thought about how kindness and habit looked the same from a distance. I wanted to ask him where he kept his sorrow, but that's not a question the city allows you to ask strangers, so I put my hands in my pockets and kept walking. At 2, she texted. Don't. Then a minute later, as though bargaining with a saw, please. I put the phone face down out of respect for all the things I didn't know how to carry. I cleaned again. The apartment frowned at me with corners I'd never noticed. Dust reveals itself when a home goes quiet. It rises and unshadows everything you refuse to see. We met at 8. He was already there, of course. Men like him are early when they think they're winning. He wore a jacket that cost what our rent used to. He didn't check his phone because he wanted me to think he didn't care about anything but this. He smiled like a small cruelty done correctly. You must be him, he said. No hand offered, no name given, as if not naming himself could keep me from understanding what he was. Coffee. His voice had the smooth of someone who practiced in mirrors. It's late, I said. Just talk, he laughed, a little too loud for the room. Heads turned. People adore the spectacle of almost violence. He leaned in. Look, he said. I didn't want to do this. Men always say that before they do the thing they rehearsed for weeks. It just happened. Things don't just happen. They are built quietly, with glances that return, with second cups, with you look tired said in doorways, with you deserve more said in cars. Do you love her? I asked. He blinked. That wasn't the game he'd brought. I'm the one asking questions, he said, but softer now. He reached for his cup, then changed his mind. She told me you were comfortable. He tried the word like a key in the wrong lock. Safe. No fire. He watched my face for a flinch. I gave him the calm I'd given her, which is not the same as surrender. And your fire? I asked. I'm life, he said, and made it sound like a brand. The barista passed, set down water with the carefulness of someone hoping today isn't the day their job requires courage. The overhead light buzzed. Outside, a bus wheezed and knelt. The city did what it always does, continued. He leaned even closer, and that's when he said it, the line that arrived with a strange relief, as if I'd been waiting for its shape in my mouth. You won't do anything, he said. You're weak. He smiled like a photographer catching the expression he flew across the world. I looked at his hands. The faint white line across his knuckles said he'd punched something too hard in his 20s and apologized to no one. I looked at my own, small cuts from a lifetime of ordinary making, onions, cardboard, the stubborn plastic on new light bulbs. I thought about the last time I raised a fist and how it felt like borrowing a tool from a shed I never visited. I thought about how tired I was of men mistaking quiet for absence. I'm not here to fight you, I said. He looked bored, disappointed. I'm here to tell you she's not a prize you win by being loud. He opened his mouth and I held up a hand. And I'm here to tell you that if she leaves me, she leaves me. She's not furniture we move between rooms. She is a person, and you should know that if you pretend to love her. The room softened. Or maybe I did. He sat back, the leather of his jacket complaining. This is what I mean, he said. Where's your pride? I smiled then, which surprised both of us. Pride, I said. Pride is what got you here with a man who knows her better than you ever will. He flinched, not at the words, but at the tone. Kindness can be a blade if you polish it long enough. He tried one more angle. She told me you never fought for her. I let that sit in the steam between us. She told me once, I said, that the best thing I ever did for her was sit with her in a dark room when her mother died and not try to fix it. He looked away, toward the door, where a couple walked in laughing at something that would not survive the night. You don't understand her yet, I added. You will, or you won't, and you'll call her names for what you failed to hold. He stood. You're pathetic, he said, but with less color now. He wanted to hurt me into a version of me that would push him. I didn't move. If she chooses you, I'll leave you alone, I said. If she chooses me, you'll leave us alone. And if she chooses neither, then we both leave her alone and learn how to grow up. He stared like I'd spoken a language he thought he was fluent in and suddenly wasn't. He brushed past me, shoulder a calculated weight. The bell above the door chimed. The rain was still there to greet him. I sat for a while with my hands around a cup I hadn't ordered, feeling the ghost heat of someone else's coffee. The barista refilled my water without asking. Kindness again, that small persistence. On the walk home, the square was empty of birds, the old man gone, the benches shining with rain. I passed a window where a TV flickered and caught a scene of two lovers running through an airport. It looked ridiculous in that moment, but I didn't judge. People try in their ways, we all are. She was waiting when I got back, sitting in the chair by the window like she'd been posed. The lamp made a halo that didn't flatter. Her hands were clasped so tight her knuckles looked like the stones of a garden path. She stood, then sat, then stood again. Well, she said. The word cracked on its way out. The apartment listened. The kettle's thought about boiling. He thinks I'm weak, I said. She swallowed. He's wrong, she whispered. I didn't ask if she meant it. I walked past her and turned on the kettle so I'd have something to do with my hands. Steam rose like forgiveness, pretending to be weather. Behind me, she said my name the way you call someone back from a ledge and hope they want to live. Tomorrow, she said, voice low. We talk. I nodded. The rain eased. The city exhaled. The kettle clicked. I poured water over leaves and watched them rise and fall as if breathing. A quiet I didn't know what to do with settled in my chest, heavy and... That night I did sleep, but right before the dark took me, I heard it again. The word he left on the table like a dare. Weak. And underneath it, another voice I hadn't heard before. Strong. The two didn't fight. They sat side by side on a bench in my head and waited for me to choose how to walk home. In the morning, the light found a way through the cloud and landed on the table where her phone had rested the day before. It was a small square of gold, almost warm. I put my hand in it like a vow. She stirred in the bedroom and I knew something had shifted, not solved, not forgiven, just shifted the way sometimes you wake and a picture frame has tilted a degree and you can't prove it to anyone but yourself. When she finally stepped into the kitchen, barefoot, eyes red, the apartment felt taller around us. I'm sorry, she said, and then nothing. The kettle was cold. The rain for once had stopped. Somewhere downstairs, a neighbor's door shut with a solid, ordinary click. I looked at her mouth and saw the words gather, then retreat. The morning held them quiet, just out of reach. She didn't leave and then come back. It wasn't cinematic like that. There was no suitcase, no taxi idling, no dramatic reversal on the stairs. Her return was a series of movements toward the kitchen, and then away, and then toward again, until the floor learned the new pattern of her feet. It was a simple thing. She placed her phone face up. A small change, like a new haircut you're not supposed to notice. But I noticed. In a life that had begun to feel like a picture behind glass, it was the sound of a nail pulled gently from a wall. We sat at the table, with the yellow bowl between us. She didn't touch it. I did, running my finger along the chip we liked to pretend was Italy. Somewhere, people were flying to that country to mend marriages. We were sitting in a one-bedroom apartment trying not to be brave. I met him, I said. I know, she said. That was it. No details. No, what did he say? It occurred to me then that she had been in both rooms long enough to know there was nothing I could report that she hadn't already felt. Why him is a question that lets both of you pretend this is math. I didn't ask it. Instead, I asked, when did we stop touching each other in the kitchen? She looked at me like I'd asked her to name a small animal she'd run over years ago. She stared at the window. I don't know, she said. Maybe when the new neighbor moved in and started his music at 6 a.m. Maybe when your boss called you on Sundays and you answered. Maybe when my mother's hands started shaking and I wanted to hold them forever, and I came home and didn't know how to ask you to hold me like that. We were quiet. The quiet had changed. It had edges now, but they weren't sharp. I was lonely, she said. It sat in the air like dust in light. Not a weapon, not an excuse, just a truth that asked to be seen and then returned to its shelf. And then he noticed. She winced at her own word. Noticed is not love, I said, and was surprised at the gentleness of my voice. I know, she said quickly. I know. I know. We spoke in small sentences, the way you do when a room might break if you raise your voice. Do you love him? I asked, because some questions appoint themselves. She looked at the floor, then at me. I wanted to, she said, and her honesty burned something clean inside me. I wanted it to be a story I could tell myself where I wasn't the villain. She laughed, a sound like a glass placed too hard on a table. But the villain is a stupid word for people who are tired. The kettle was empty. I filled it. Water thrummed into steel and sang quietly. Do you love me? I asked, and the words didn't tremble. She didn't answer right away. The hum of the building, a little higher than usual, like a violin tuning, filled the space. I do, she said finally, but love got quiet. She looked at her hands, then unclasped them like a student told to loosen up. I don't know how to make it loud again without lying. I watched the way sunlight found her hair and thought about all the mornings sunlight had done that, and I'd been too busy measuring the day to see it. We could try, I said. Not to fix, not to erase, just to sit in the same room and not rehearse. She smiled then, not the photogenic smile for strangers, but the one that made her look like the girl from years ago who wore a thrift store sweater and wanted everything. We could, she said. We tried. It looked like ordinary life. It looked like me buying the bread she liked even though the bakery was an extra 6 minutes out of the way. It looked like her putting my mug in the freezer for 10 minutes before pouring iced coffee the way my mother used to in August. It looked like walking without phones to the small park, where the benches faced a patch of trees brave enough to be green against a city that preferred stone. One night we listened to the album we used to claim as ours and didn't skip the track we always skipped because it reminded us of a fight we once had in a car in the rain. It rained that night, too. The room softened. The lamp hummed like it remembered. We were closer than we'd been in months. Not the romantic kind of close you show people to prove something, but the quiet kind that lets you hear someone breathe and trust that it means they want to be here. And then the world knocked. He texted her a photo, the two of them at the cafe, the angle unmistakable. Memories, the caption said, and my mouth filled with a taste like pennies. She looked at me, then at the phone, then at me. "I'll block him," she said, fingers shaking. She did, hands clumsy with urgency. We watched the screen go still, as if we could see his absence arrive. But absence is not arrival. It's not even departure. It's a space your body keeps checking like a tongue on a missing tooth. The next day, she received an email from an address that looked like a child's code. "You can't pretend," it said. "It is astonishing how people who call you liars want you to keep acting." She closed the laptop like it was a book you don't have to finish. "I'm sorry," she said again, and the word didn't feel smaller. It felt tired in a way that made me want to carry it for both of us. We went to bed early, bodies arranged with care. There is a dignity to sleeping near someone you've hurt. It requires a stillness that refuses theater. In the dark, she reached for my hand under the covers, a small, blind searching. Our fingers found each other like two people meeting in a long hallway and choosing not to pass without touch. For a moment, the room let us think we were new. Sometime before dawn, rain moved through like a gentle cough. She whispered, "I don't want to lose you." The words made a hollow sound in me, like dropping a stone into a well that has forgotten water. "You might," I whispered back. "Honesty is not unkindness. It's a light that won't interrogate you, only show you the edges where you keep cutting yourself." She squeezed my hand. We lay like that until the light drew a thin line across the curtains. Morning comes even on days it shouldn't. Coffee rose like a small, stubborn promise. We made breakfast quietly, passing plates like we were in a ballet for amateurs. The toaster burned and we laughed finally at something stupid and small and ours. The laugh turned into a breath we didn't know we'd been holding. "We could leave the city," she said suddenly, as if bigger moves would mean bigger chances. "We could start where no one knows us." "Maybe," I said, "but we'd take us with us." She nodded slowly, eyes glassy, not from tears but from thinking too hard about being alive. "Then what?" she asked. I looked at the window, at the way the condensation had left a ghost of the line I traced days ago. "Then we stay," I said, "at least until we're not running from a version of us that might have been brave." She said. The chair made its honest sound. The street murmured about things that didn't matter to us. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the ring she'd stopped wearing in the house but kept when she walked outside. She placed it on the table between us like a coin you set down in a place where tipping is a gesture, not an obligation. "I don't know where this belongs anymore," she said, voice steady in a way that should have warned me. The ring glowed in the thin morning light, stubborn, small. I looked at it and felt something unclench in my chest. Not victory, not defeat. A loosening, like a knot that has been patient with your fingers finally agreeing to try. I touched the metal with my index finger. Cool, true. When I looked up, she was already watching the door, not to leave, but like she expected someone to come through with news either of us could use. "I need to see him," she said, not looking at me. The room tilted. Not with anger, but with the old understanding that closure can be a bridge or a cliff. "No," I said softly. "You need to see yourself." She blinked. "And maybe that means seeing him," I added, because pretending otherwise would make me a liar in my own kitchen. "But if you do, do it in daylight. Do it without secrets. Do it like someone who knows what her life costs." She nodded once, slow. The ring stayed on the table. The kettle clicked. Outside, a bus breathed, and an engine somewhere failed to start and then did. She stood, then sat, then stood again, the dance we had learned when words weren't enough and movement had to carry their meaning. "Will you be here when I get back?" she asked. I wanted to say yes like a vow. I wanted to say no like a man who knew how to protect himself. What I said was true and terrible and kind. "I don't know." She picked up the ring, held it in her fist like a smooth stone you take from a river and never confess to. At the door, she looked back at me the way you look at a house you grew up in, full of gratitude and a little grief for the rooms you won't visit again. The door was quiet when it closed. That's how I knew the day had chosen to be gentle. The apartment filled with a silence that didn't accuse. Morning light pooled on the floor like water finding its level. I made the bed. I opened the balcony and let the air in, gray and honest. The city hummed like a body starting to heal. Somewhere below, someone laughed too loud for this hour, and I smiled in spite of everything. Then the phone buzzed on the table, not hers, mine. An unknown number, one word, "Today," and the light seemed to shift 1 degree towards something I would have to name. There is a particular silence that only morning can make. Not the hush of night, which is soft and velvet and full of secrets, but a thin, pale quiet that smells like toast and metal and rain that can't decide. It found me in the kitchen at 6:40, holding a mug with both hands like it might run away. The ring was back on the table. I hadn't put it there. She had, sometime between leaving and not leaving. It sat in a small square of light like an object in a museum that wants to be touched and can't. She returned before the city fully woke. Coat damp hair pulled back with urgency, eyes that had walked through themselves. She closed the door and leaned against it, not dramatically, just a body listening to its hinge, deciding whether to trust it this time. We looked at each other for a long time the way strangers do, when they both almost tripped on the same crack in the sidewalk and are too relieved to laugh. I told him, she said. The room didn't ask what. I told him I didn't want to be a person who keeps answering the wrong questions. She stepped forward, slow. I told him I wanted to see if we could make quiet into something that doesn't hurt. She swallowed. He said I would regret it. She managed a smile that didn't reach for mercy. Maybe I will, but I don't want my life to be a list of impulsive mistakes dressed up as bravery. We sat. The table knew us by now, gathered our elbows without complaint. I don't know how to forgive you, I said, not unkindly. She nodded, a small, grateful movement, like being given a chair in a crowded room. I don't know how to forgive myself, she said. The rain started again, pretending to be a sheet of paper you could write a new life on if only it would hold ink. Forgiveness without reunion, I said, the words surprising us both. What? She asked, eyes wet but not pleading. It's a thing, I said, though maybe it isn't, or maybe it is only for people who want to be better than their worst day. It's where you let go without reaching back, the apartment breathed. The kettle considered. Outside, a truck beeped in reverse, insisting the world had rules. She was quiet, then, do you think that's us? The question did not ask for comfort. It asked for bravery she could stand to live with. I looked at the ring. I looked at her hands, open on the table, palms up as if to say, see, nothing hidden. I think, I said slowly, we loved each other enough to make a home out of small rooms. I think we lost our way in the hallways between them. I think you were alone, and I was absent in a way that looks like presence until you need to lean. She closed her hands and then opened them again, as if practicing a trick. I didn't cheat because you were weak, she said. I cheated because I was. The words landed like a feather that used to be a blade. We watched them together. Maybe, I said, weakness is just a name we give to the parts of us that can't carry what we force them to. She reached for the ring, held it like it had a pulse. I could stay, she said. The city brightened by a tone, a violin string tuned higher. We could try for the version of us that sits on porches at 60 and argues about birds, the image unspooled, warm and ordinary. It made my throat ache. We could, I said, and we might find it, or we might teach each other slowly how to be kind to the wrong person. She nodded, a tear made its quiet way along the edge of her nose, and fell without drama. We are built to fall without drama if we can help it. If I go, she said, will you hate me less? I smiled, that tired miracle. I don't hate you now, I said. I hate the room we built to put this in. She almost laughed. We were good architects, she said. We were, I said, and maybe it's time to stop being so good at building places to keep the alive things from growing. We stood at the same time. The chairs made their honest sounds. She put the ring in my hand. It was heavier than it had a right to be, like a coin from a country that no longer exists. Keep it, she said, not as a promise, as proof. I wanted to ask, proof of what? But the answer arrived without my help. Proof that we were here, that we tried, that we knew enough to stop trying when trying became a way to hide. On the balcony, the rain drew soft lines in the air. We stood beneath the overhang and watched it work. He said you were weak, she murmured, not to reopen the wound, but to touch its edges tenderly. He was wrong, she added. I shrugged. He taught me a word I no longer need, I said, and meant it. Strength felt like choosing not to carry what wasn't mine and not dropping what. We didn't hug, we didn't kiss, we didn't perform a goodbye for a future audience. She picked up her bag small, already waiting by the door because some part of her had known the shape of this morning before we arrived in it. I'll send the address, she said, of where I'll be, not because you owe me visits. Because I don't want to go back to hiding. I nodded. We practiced the new shape of our faces. At the door she paused. One day, she said, I hope we can sit in the same row at a small theater and not think about the seats between us. I pictured it. An autumn matinee, a play with too much rain on stage, two people who once believed they could save each other watching strangers pretend to be brave. One day, I said. We let that day go. When the door clicked, the apartment changed temperature by half a thought. I stood in the center of the room like a piece of furniture someone left in a house for the next person to understand. The morning pushed a clean square of light onto the floor. I moved into it and stood there until my feet warmed. I placed the ring in the yellow bowl with Italy, where it made a small sound that felt like punctuation, not a period. Not yet. The kettle clicked. The city's traffic gathered itself like a choir clearing throats. I poured water over leaves and watched them rise, then settle small green lungs. On the window, condensation formed, drew itself into a shape that looked almost like a new map. I pressed my finger to the glass and traced a line that went nowhere and felt like a road. By noon, I had opened every window an inch. The apartment breathed in shy drafts. I folded the throw with the coffee island and put it on the back of the chair by the window because memory doesn't have to be a weapon if you arrange it with care. I let the radio find a station where a woman's voice sang about being brave and stupid and loved and alone. I let it be background. I let it be not about me. Rain began again and didn't ask permission. Somewhere a siren started and decided to stop. Somewhere someone cursed in a stairwell and then laughed at themselves, the laugh echoing up and up like proof that people mean well even when they don't. The city kept its promise to continue. I made mine. I washed the mug. I placed it upside down on the rack so water could leave. I waited for the quiet to feel like something other than a verdict. When the light finally slipped from gray to a color that might, in the right poem, be called silver, I sat in the chair by the window and let my body understand it was safe. She would build a new room somewhere else. I would learn to live inside the old one without mistaking absence for failure. A small bird landed on the rail, shook its feathers like a dog after a bath, then lifted away with no music. In the glass, my face looked like a man who had not done nothing. He had listened, he had stood still, he had chosen not to meet force with force, and had learned the names of other kinds of strength. He had let go without flinging the thing he loved so hard it broke on the wall. Evening would come and with it a different kind of quiet. For now the morning was enough, for now the rain, for now a sentence I could live with. Sometimes letting go is the only way to stay. Now the rain, for now a sentence I could live with. Sometimes letting go is the only way to stay.